The transition process starts at the age of 14 and carries all the way to exit. That's when you'll face the question, what do you want for your child to be doing after the school bus stops coming? Now, this is going to be different for everybody. It is a completely individualized experience. Using your child's school experiences will help with doing some research, using resources at your disposal, be it a special educator, general education teacher, school admin, or, if so supported, a transition specialist. You're also going to rely on outside agencies. And no lie, it is a lot of information. There is a lot out there, and there is a lot to consider. Now, of course, trying to do it all at once can feel really consuming. So we're here to get the conversation going. Welcome. We are here for the Post-Secondary Transition Podcast, where we have conversations around the ins and outs and everything in between of the transition process for families of students with disabilities. I'm one of the hosts. My name is Patrick Cadigan. I am a special education teacher, and I do have a co-host, and who would that be?
Hi, I am Megan Smallwood, and I am a public school transition coordinator.
And boom, here we go. What? First day of school. How'd it go?
I know. It was good. It was a good first day. It was good to see all the kids back. It's kind of funny, though, as we talk about preparing for exit, to look at some of my students that came back and think, this is your last first day. It's the, start of the final year. So.
It is your exit year.
Yes.
What to expect?
Right. And I'm sure the parents are thinking about that a lot more than the students are. But regardless, do not freak out. You are not alone. And you've been researching and you've been planning and you're ready for this. Even if you don't feel like you're ready for this, it will be okay. Just remember, you have people here to help you. And it's not as scary as you think. So just breathe. We're here to make it a little easier.
All right. So I'm going to throw it out there then. For parents who are about to walk into this new beginning, how do I say this? Who's going to be there to help walk them through this?
So definitely, if like in our county, you have a transition specialist at your disposal in your school, lean on them. They will be a huge support for you. If you don't, that's okay. You still have a case manager. You have other special educators. You might have a special education ITL or instructional team leader that you're close with, but also a huge resource for parents or other parents who have gone through the process. Ones that might have exited last year or 5 years ago. I know at some of my schools, it's natural when you have like an academic life skills class that the families become close, the kids become friends, they're in the same boat, that you keep in touch with them. And kind of check in with them and pick their brain and just go out and have coffee and ask them how it went for them, any tidbits that they should know. So other parents are a great resource.
Yeah, I was just going to throw out there that at least in our sphere, and I can't believe I'm actually going to say this out loud because I've kind of become not so much a proponent of social media, but...
What?
Yeah, I know. Right? Well, it's just, I don't know. My take on social media, I don't know. I come in and out and with all the changes, but I will throw out there that, of course, both you and I, we belong to a couple of Facebook groups, and I pay very close attention to what the families in those groups are talking about. And they, like you said, they are there to help each other. You can see it in real time. It's really cool.
Yeah. And some of these Facebook groups, I know, even have side chats going on about certain topics that, I'll pop on every now and then, and I'll learn a whole bunch of stuff from parents who have gone through, different scenarios. So it's a really good resource, even if you're not a huge fan of social media, just for that purpose alone, connecting with others. And I know we've talked about this before, different programs that have come from social media where parents connected and decided they wanted something different, or they had this goal in mind for their child or young adult, and they found other parents with the same mindset and took off from there. So,
well, okay. So and I'm going to throw it out there that when in all of the discussions that you and I have had prior to this, and when I think of the exit year, I think of the vocabulary term milestone. So what are some of the milestones that should have been tackled by now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're notorious for talking about milestones. Don't forget those milestones, different ages that, they come upon them. Medicaid is one, for example, which I should start with SSI because a lot of times you get SSI and then you get Medicaid. Regardless, Medicaid, you will need that to access your Developmental Disabilities Administration or DDA funding. So you definitely want to have that one tackled. SSI, like I mentioned, not required, but definitely beneficial. If you're considering guardianship or alternatives to guardianship, again, we've mentioned before, there's no set time that has to be done, but just something you should have considered at this point or talked to some other people. Same thing with Able Account or Special Needs Trust. And again, we have a number of resources about all of this information. We've done podcasts on them. So these are some of the milestones that should be behind you at this point.
And then what about on the school side? What can parents be doing?
Hopefully you've researched and gone to some of the workshops offered, in your county and attended if there's a transition fair, just a plug. Howard County's having one coming up.
Public service announcement. There will be.
Great opportunity. Network and gather information, just saying. But you definitely want to go out and, continue the research process, whether it be at the fair or just reaching out to different agencies if you're going that route, or like we said, other parents, just to gather as much information as possible. And again, your transition specialist, if you have one in your building, really can help with this. I have had many parents who asked to do sessions monthly, just helped for them to have a minute to say, okay, I think I've got this, but let me double check with you. Or just send me a text or a phone call or cry on my shoulder, whatever they needed at that time, like trying to help make life easier. That's what I feel like my role is.
Segueing out of that, one of the things that, of course, knowing what we were going to be talking about, I started to look over some of the resources that we had posted to our website, www.postsecondary-transition.com. And under the Start Here tab, when you scroll down, you will find yourself like identifying, who is the student that I'm talking about? Do I have a certificate track student, or which is to say a student who is not graduating with a diploma, but will, be finished from the school system with a certificate, or a student who is going to graduate with a diploma? And when I click on the senior for the certificate track, but one of the things that I had noticed was gathering school records.
Yeah.
And so can you do you want to talk a little bit more about that? Like, what kind of records are parents going to be,
Yeah, great point. I mean, obviously they're going to be looking for an IEP, or they'll also be looking for, a behavior plan if that's in place. But one of the biggest pieces that I know DDA looks for is that psychological or cognitive assessment that's been completed. And they really, the coordinator will ask for one that's been done within the last 3 years. Now, I know that last year there's a lot going on. If it isn't within the last 3 years, that might be a conversation to have with your case manager or ask your transition specialist about. But it's definitely important for DDA because they want the most recent picture of the functional levels of your child to show how much support they will need long term and how much funding they would need, because it will help with their matrix score, which we'll talk a little bit about later. Now, if it's not your exit year and you're listening to this, just take a look and see when the last time your psychological assessment was done. I mean, best practice, I know in our county, is to have one done every 6 years. If it's coming up on a 6th year, then that's definitely a conversation if you have a reevaluation meeting coming up. I will say at the beginning of each year, what I like to do as a transition specialist is just go and check with my students on the caseload at my school to see when last psychological assessments were done, and if anyone has a reevaluation meeting coming up, and if they're exiting within the next 3 years, just so it's naturally being completed. Not always something that I think is thought about until last minute, so it's good to be proactive and just keep track of that. And make sure you have a copy on file. You can always ask the school for an extra copy.
At this point, by exit year, should the student have a coordinator of community service?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I would hope they'd have one, and I would hope you have heard from them. If not, then that is a great question for your transition specialist to find out who it should be, because they can help track them down with DDA. I know we've talked about the turnover with them.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, referring back to the Facebook groups that we've been talking about, boy, so much of the chatter recently has just been some of the very real frustrations that families are finding with just so many different aspects of all the stuff that's going on right now.
Yeah, there's such a big turnover with them, unfortunately. It's tricky, especially when you are going through exit year. And I know that's a huge concern of parents because I've seen parents who have been like almost to the finish line and then the coordinator leaves and it's like Groundhog Day. You're starting from scratch. And a lot of times the new coordinator doesn't have all the documents and they're scrambling to put it all back in place. So at this point, reach out, or if you don't know who it is, ask for help to figure out who it is, community, get in touch with them, and just start the conversation and ask them for support because that's what they should be doing. And I know sometimes they need their memory jogged that you have an exiting young adult because they have a large caseload themselves. So it doesn't hurt to reach out more than once if you don't hear back, or go to the supervisor if you haven't heard. So,
well, and then one of the other things, and hey, pro tip, upcoming, here we go. And we've talked about this multiple times before. Make sure to keep records of everything that the coordinator sends you, because of changing frequently, potentially changing frequently. You do not want to start over at like one of those crucial points.
Right. And I know I've had parents in the past who have asked me, am I stuck with the same coordinator? No, absolutely not. I give them a fair chance. You want to keep the lines of communication open, but if you really are feeling unhappy or you really feel like you need a change, you can always make that change happen with DDA, that you're not set in stone with one. Also, you want them to be involved with the IEP team. And I know in our county specifically, we have a form that the transition specialist has parents sign called the informed parental consent to invite them to the annual IEP meeting every year. And that senior or exit year is the most important year that you want them there because it's helpful for them to hear from other members of the team, like the speech pathologist, the physical therapist, occupational therapist, and it really paints that full picture of your young adult.
Again, I'm thinking of segueing in, and the big word that comes to my mind is options. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about like what options do families have?
Right. So I know we've talked about DDA side of things. So kind of sticking with that, the biggest decision you have to make is, are you doing a traditional route or self-directed route, or both? Traditional, talking about, day program or going with an agency. Self-directed, I know we've talked about, where you're customizing or making an individual plan for your young adult. And some have figured out how to do both, do a little bit from an agency, a little bit of self-direct, and doing something on your own. So just exploring and researching both sides to make the best decision for your family, and visiting the agencies in your area if you haven't already. Again, your transition specialist is very helpful to help set those up and provide contact information and even go with you. Your coordinator can do this as well if you have a relationship or you've been in touch with them, and they can give you more information on different agencies too. We do have a list of questions on our website that you can ask the different agencies on your visit, which are very helpful because I know sometimes it can be overwhelming when you go in and looking around.
Wait, there's a useful resource on the website? What?
There is. I know. Shocking.
List
of questions.
where are they going to find it? Which page is it on? I can't remember.
Should be adult agencies under the certificate side.
Right. Yep.
And I mean, there's things that, I remember giving it to a parent and they're like, oh my gosh, we get transportation? I'm like, well, that's the question to ask them, because I know in our area, a lot of the places we go will do curb to curb transportation, but not all of them do. So it's good to keep record of who does what and make sure you ask those questions when you go.
I will say that one of the things that you and I have been discussing, and we mentioned it briefly in the last episode, but for longtime listeners, we had a conversation with Coordinator of Community Service, Jamie Broadnax, and we have been continuing that discussion just offline. But we're going to be bringing her back here real soon, and we're going to sit down and talk with her very specifically about self-direction, because, of course, we're always really interested in how she sees it from her side. We're the public school teachers, right? She's the private sector side. So I always,
nonprofit.
I always feel like she's just always has some really interesting insights. And
Well,
she's,
that's why I love going to meetings when the parent invites me to attend with the coordinator. It's just so interesting to hear the things that, aren't necessarily in the realm of my job, but I'm curious. I want to know after 21 what this all means and what you're going to be looking at. So I think it's beneficial, and I'm excited for us to talk to Jamie a little bit more about self-directed specifically.
yeah, that's going to be a great conversation. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to it. Let's see. Other options? What's the next set of options?
Yeah, so self-directed, like we've said, make sure you're, talking to others who have done it, listen to our podcast. Just figure out for you what is meaningful for your adult. What would that look like? So many times I've heard parents when they're thinking self-directed, they will talk to other parents, but they'll say, "Tell me what his schedule looks like. I want to know what Johnny does from, sun up to sundown." Well, that's not individualized if you're trying to figure out how that works for your child. You have to figure out, is work, is community exploration, is volunteering, what is meaningful, and start making those connections in your community to the things that might be meaningful. But also, another option that parents have considered, and it's becoming more popular, and I know myself and another transition specialist have really been doing the research to explore some of these, the post-secondary college experience for our students on the certificate track. Think College, another resource that you can find on our website, is a wonderful resource to help explain and explore the options that are available. Because the colleges use an alternate admissions process for these students, but then once they're on campus, they have a very typical experience. So it kind of ties in with that inclusive opportunity that they've had through their whole school experience.
So is DORS part of this discussion for our families? Is that an option for them?
Yeah, so I know we've talked a lot about DDA. It is possible to have the DORS funding along with DDA. However, DDA will take precedent because DDA is long-term funding. DORS is considered short-term funding. So obviously, if you're going up against each other, and if you have the option of either one, you stick with DORS. Or no, to record that.
We're gonna cut that one out.
That is a blooper. So if you have the option between DORS or DDA funding, you're going to want to go with the DDA funding because that's the long-term funding. However, for those who might not have been eligible for DDA because it is an eligibility process, DORS is definitely an option. And that would be the vocational rehabilitation or VR status, which is different from pre-ETS, which is a whole nother application. Yeah, application after application. But DORS is something that could be offered and provide some assistance with employment and also regaining employment if, something happened and they no longer were employed. You would access more services than you would during the pre-ET services, window. But the ultimate goal with DORS in the VR status is employment. And I know students who have accessed it while they're going to college, as long as the goal is to find a job after college.
I cannot lie. I think that one of the biggest things that always kind of trips me up when it comes to those two agencies is like what you were talking about, the short term versus the long term. And sometimes in my brain it gets interchangeable, but I do know that there are significant differences.
Yeah, and I know, you hear both of them and you're like, "Oh, funding, I got to get all the funding." But again, if you have to make a decision and you are eligible for DDA, you're going to go with DDA. That is long term. That will give you the support your young adult will need, past 21 and beyond. However, DORS, like I said, you can access it, but it's short term and you can't overlap them. Obviously, you're going to want to no state funding wants to be, double dipping at the same time. So you're going to have to work your magic if you're going to use both.
So let's open up the conversation then to timeline. All right. So you have a family who is coming in. This is their exit year. And is there a timeline that they should be following?
Yeah. So let's say fall, September, October, November. Again, you're going to want your coordinator invited to the IEP meeting for the year. So checking in with your transition specialist, or if you don't have one, a case manager, to make sure that's happening. Attend those transition events, transition fair for Howard County. That's coming up, and you want to attend as many as you can. Along the same lines, you want to go out and meet the different providers or agencies we talked about. You can go back and visit as many as you want. or as many times as you want. You can bring your young adult with you. You can ask them as many questions as you want, but you want to at least have 3 in mind, because especially since COVID, we've found it's harder and harder for young adults to be accepted because of staffing issues and being able to meet needs. So you definitely want to have backup plans upon backup plans. So having a list, and that's where your coordinator and your transition specialist can definitely help. You want to start thinking about filling out the application, and there is a universal application which your coordinator will help you with, that many of the providers do use these days. So you want to at least talk to your coordinator about that, and your coordinator should be, on top of this and should be following this timeline and mentioning these things. But I know when you sit down and have a 3-hour meeting with the coordinator, your head starts spinning and you're like, wait, they mentioned this and I'd have to do this. And I'm not sure when this happened. So, it again, ask questions. And I know it gets a little scary when, October, November's hitting and you haven't heard from anyone and parents start to feel like they're behind the 8 ball. But, that's why we want you to know what should start happening. Depending on the timeline and depending on how much of your information you have ready, the coordinator can submit for the matrix referral. And so the matrix referral, and we've talked about this in past podcasts, so I won't go into too many details, but that's kind of what gives you a number to determine how much support your young adult will need from DDA in terms of funding. So your coordinator is going to submit for the matrix referral, which we've talked about in other podcasts. But basically, that matrix number is what will determine the level of support your young adult needs and the amount of funding that DDA will provide. And the score is basically 2 scores based off of health and safety and supervision. 5 is the highest and determines that the young adult requires the most amount of support. And 1 is the lowest, determining that they are fairly independent and require minimal support. So that matrix number is important to help kind of shape, if you were looking, and I know a lot of parents, when we go into different programs, say, my child needs a one-on-one. And the program will say, sure, you can have a one-on-one based off of what DDA says. And what they mean is DDA saying, if your child has a 5, well, then they need funding for a one-on-one because they need the most support. If you have like a 3, you're probably not going to get the funding for a one-on-one. So that's another tip too. When you go to agencies, they're going to tell you a lot of, yeah, sure, we can do that. Yeah, sure, we can do that. But that's why you need to have backup plans, because when it comes time for the specifics and, the real talk, they might not be able to do it. So just be aware.
Well, one word that I heard you use in that the context of that conversation was shaping. And isn't the coordinator of community service also going to work to help create that initial person-centered plan, right? That outline.
Right. That will start developing probably as we get into the winter here. And that will help to outline the different services and supports that you're going to want to request through the waiver application. I know, another application. That's the waiver application with DDA that determines which waiver that your young adult will go into for funding purposes. So come wintertime, we're thinking like December, your coordinator should be in touch and say, hey, what agencies or providers are you thinking of? And that's when you're going to tell them your top, hopefully 3. You have a top 1, kind of like when you're choosing a college. You've got your top college and then you've got your safety schools. Well, you want to at least have 2 backups, like we said. You can also tell your transition coordinator. It's good to keep them informed as well, just so that they're aware and, they can help out if communication's not really happening with any ends. And then also, if you're planning to go self-directed, you want to make sure everyone's aware of that too. You are going to be asked for different financial documents and other documents, personal documents, for that waiver that your coordinator is going to be applying for with DDA. And that will be solely between your coordinator from DDA and you, a transition specialist. People from school don't have any input on this, but just be aware they'll ask you then to start gathering a whole bunch of different records. And I think they also need updated medical, like from a physician, a dentist, like there's just a whole slew of things that come about. So be prepared. Then come a little later in the winter, January, February, March, DDA will provide approval for the coordinator to submit the waiver application, and that is determined on when DDA says it's okay. So a lot of times it's a waiting game. The coordinator's waiting for DDA to give the green light to submit things. So you might not hear from the coordinator, things might not seem like they're happening, but as long as the coordinator's collected what they need and they're just waiting, you're good to go. Because as soon as the green light is given, then they can push the button and the ball should start rolling. And you'll apply for the waiver. You don't necessarily have a say in which waiver. DDA kind of determines based off of the fact that you have a transitioning youth, and the top priority for them is day programming. So you would go in that waiver. In rare circumstances where residential is needed, because that's the difference really between the waivers. There's one that it's mostly just for the day programming, and the other one is for residential and day programming. They would determine which one then. And you can always change down the road. You're not tied to one. As you get older, if you decide residential is an option that you'd like for your young adult, that can happen. But for all intents and purposes, you don't have to worry about which waiver. You're going in a waiver. That's all you need to know.
And then can families can they request, or is it literally one of those no, you've applied, this is what we're giving you and that's it?
I've had families request or say, we're interested in residential, unless there was a reasoning for the residential, 21, caretaker cannot, care for them anymore, or they're going to be homeless, or whatever the reason may be. It can't just be, I want them to move out. That could be something they come as they become older, but at 21, making sure everyone has a meaningful day is top priority. So your request may not be granted, but you will still have a waiver. So you're going to work with your coordinator to get that waiver information in. And then again, it's kind of a waiting game for DDA to get back to you. Communication is important because you want to make sure things aren't falling through the cracks. So, checking with your coordinator. Sometimes there's been circumstances where maybe the coordinator hasn't had any luck hearing, but the parent was able to go higher and the parent got some feedback. So don't be afraid to nag. This is important. This is preparing for life. Make sure that you're in the know. And if you need help with that, reach out to your supports to see if anyone else can give you some guidance. So then come springtime, we're thinking April, May, June, after the waiver application has been approved. Yay, hopefully it's all taken care of in a nice, orderly fashion. That person-centered plan will be revised. And that's usually when you would reflect what provider, if you're going that route, is going to be providing services for your young adult. Once that's all approved, a start date for services can be given, and that would happen after July 1st. And hopefully it's as close to July 1st as possible. However, if things are being held up at DDA's end with the waiver application or for whatever other reason, it could be later. So I know that's also a fear of a lot of families that, they're going to be sitting at home. And unfortunately, it's gotten better since COVID, but that does still happen, especially if you go the self-directed route. There's a lot of times that you might submit a budget and DDA will come back with questions, and you have to answer these questions and go back and forth, and so that your timeline's pushed back a little bit. But again, just stay on top of it. And fingers crossed. If you have everything in order and you're chipping away at it, I have parents that just exited this year that their young adult is already in the program, and it's August, so it is possible.
As I'm sitting here listening to talk, I'm wondering, is there another conversation to be had around person-centered planning?
So many conversations, but yes, person-centered planning, and that all kind of ties into charting the life course, which I know in our county, the transition specialists are going to be getting some more training on. But it really comes back to, you are not alone in this. You have a whole group of people around you and your young adult, and it's pulling in all these people that know your young adult from different parts of their life to share what they feel, is an important part of them and how it fits into the big plan and what would be a meaningful life for them. So you don't have to wait until 21 to start planning for your person-centered plan. If swimming is a major part of your young adult's life. Well, then heck, swimming is going to be in their day, some form, some shape or form. If, being in the community or being with people of their own age is important, like that has to be front and center. Like it's individualized. It's whatever is important for your young adult and you.
And charting your life plan. Why do I feel like I've heard that before? I think we discussed that when I was doing my studies at Towson, right?
You probably did. Charting the life course framework, and we are lucky enough to have the Hussman Foundation working with us.
Yeah, of course.
That. And it's a great framework, and we should also that could be something we can dive a little more into as well in another podcast.
Once again, more future conversations to be had.
Oh, there's the never ending. Yes, for sure.
All right. Good stuff. Well, and then trying to think of how to segue out.
And then we call to action.
And then, yeah. Well, needless to say, I mean, I'm looking forward to those conversations and so many of the other conversations that we still yet to have. So I think that's going to be really cool.
Just when you think we've covered it all, but wait, there's more.
Oh, yeah. No, forget that, man. Like we were always saying, there's always rabbit holes. One rabbit hole after the other. All right. Well, I think we've covered quite a bit, and it's going to be nice. I will throw out there that there's going to be a link in the show notes to this and all the other information that we've covered, but it's really nice to be able to go back and reference other conversations that we've already had, right? Mm-hmm. So that'll be really helpful. Well, I'll tell you what then. I think this conversation, I think we're good.
Me too. I think, it's a good one. Hopefully it's helpful.
No, we're not done. We got one more thing. Do you remember what it is?
That's so helpful.
Yeah. Well, that's helpful resource. And guess whose turn it is?
Is it me?
Of course. Once again, Patrick, you have thrown your co-host under the bus.
Yes, you have.
Oh, you know what, though? Hold on. No. I got one because, so I'll tell you what. I caught Meghan off guard with that's helpful resource. I didn't prepare her ahead of time. So, but I do have one. That I think that parents and families can find helpful. For those of you who don't know, I am a big podcast guy. All right. I not only, jump out there with podcasts and, make them and create them, blah, blah, blah. But I also listen to a whole lot of them. And one of the ones that I came across was the All Autism Talk podcast. And very recently they posted an episode with the title Back to School Tips for Parents of Kids with Autism. I was particularly taken with this discussion because they brought on a parent who was discussing her experiences around working with her child with autism. And as I was listening to it, I just found it was a good conversation, lots of useful tips and tricks. And I think that anybody in that situation will find this conversation helpful. So I'm going to leave a link to that in our show notes for this episode of the All Autism Talk podcast. And I think it's really cool.
Awesome.
All right. So I'll tell you what, I think this conversation is over. You want to close us out there, Miss Smallwood?
Absolutely. I think we appreciate you coming again. And we want to make sure that you follow the information from this conversation in our show notes. Like, follow, and please share out the podcast with everyone. Like we said, make sure everyone who's exiting knows and everyone who's exiting in the next few years. Visit our YouTube channel where we've posted videos of all our conversations, including doing some of the legwork for you by curating videos of topics that revolve around transition. We've created playlists that cover guardianship, alternatives to guardianship, able accounts, and still more to come. So be sure to subscribe there as well. And finally, check out our website, which is chock full of information around the transition process. And you'll also find our contact information there too. So go to www.postsecondarytransition.com.
All right.
And I think that's all we wrote.
And I think that is all she wrote. So I think we're going to go ahead and we're going to sign off. We look forward to having more conversations with you guys, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.